Hello, Tim.
Good afternoon.
I know Larry will not be joining us today. Unfortunately, he's not feeling that well, so
Uh-oh.
he'll be out today.
Okay. Well, I think they actually got the right numbers in the email that went out today. I think.
Well, yeah, well, I was just using my own notes, so I don't know.
Well, Jill called me from the office to double check it. And I said, those are the ones that we've been using for the last couple of weeks. So, so hopefully it'll be right. I don't know if anybody will be joining because email didn't get out very soon. I think it was out maybe an hour ago, but listen.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're probably right about that. Like I said, I don't know offhand. Let me look here. No, okay, I'll skip that. Anyway, I'm on the page. I keep a separate notebook with all the events happening. So
Right.
I try to keep up on them, but it's not always 100% guaranteed. How have you been doing?
Well, it was a good week. We were able to get the inauguration
Right.
without any violence or any trouble. So that was good. I don't know if you watched it or not.
Oh, yes, of course.
I thought it was
Always do.
I thought it was very well done,
Yeah.
given the COVID restrictions and everything. So.
And the poet laureate now is one of the more famous people in the country.
I know, for a very young 22-year-old woman, she certainly has made a name for herself.
Well, her two books just went to #1 and #2 on Amazon's list.
Wow.
So
I have to say, it was a very incredible poem, but also part of what made it so good was the way she delivered it.
Oh, absolutely. Her delivery was very good.
I know. Having been a former English teacher and all of that, I was like, wow. I was
wow.
very impressed by her words, by her ability to deliver it. And then I read that when she was a child, she had a speech impediment.
That's interesting, considering our president certainly has one too.
Exactly. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, but clearly she's managed to work beyond it because she was a young lady with a great deal of poise, a great deal of presence,
So, yes, I haven't read her full background. What is her education background? Do you know?
She's a Harvard graduate.
Oh, not bad.
So clearly, she's doing okay. But yeah, I was just watching it, and then when she was introduced, and I didn't know who she was, and then when she began to speak and to recite on it, I was just transfixed. I couldn't take my eyes off of her.
Yeah,
it had Lady Gaga making her own statement, but she sang the national anthem beautifully.
Yeah, she did. She absolutely did. Some people commented on her dress, but it was high fashion. It was designed by that's not my area, but it was interesting. They talked about fashion a lot on the here's Flossie.
Hi, Tim.
Hello. Well, I thought you were going to buy that same dress for Flossie.
I don't think I could afford it. Those dresses, you almost need to take a mortgage out to be able to buy one.
Have you tried it?
Imagine if you wore that when we finally reopened the synagogue, you could wear it to services.
Yeah.
And the front door would be leading to the back door, and there I am.
Yeah, it was, but like I said, she sang it beautifully.
She sang beautifully.
I liked the whole ceremony. I liked the president's speech. I thought it was very him. I thought it reflected who he is very, very well. So I did. I thought, it was difficult doing it in there were the parades, the crowds weren't there, but they made it.
I know. They made it.
I thought the arch was a bishop or whoever he was that did the first prayer at the beginning. I loved the fact that he kept the prayer very God-centric. He didn't get into Christian, Jesus theology. He just made it a very spiritual, God-centric kind of prayer.
Yeah, I know. That was interesting.
But I
Made
think
it
that was
made it a little more inclusive.
right.
And certainly didn't offend anybody by it. So
No.
it was very good.
No.
Have you had any with the vaccine? Have you gotten yours yet, or?
No. Caleb is vaccinated because he was in the study, and he went in last Friday, last week.
Wow.
And he was told that when, he didn't know whether he had it or he had the placebo, but they unblinded him in the study last week and he got the vaccine. So he's vaccinated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Good for him.
I don't know when
Now,
I'll be in line for it. Hopefully now with the new administration that can get things perhaps
correct.
a little bit
They're
more
talking
organized.
about. Yes. I'm sorry, Tim.
So no, I'm just hoping that it's been Georgia was, out of the 50 states, Georgia was 49th. That's how bad we were doing.
Yeah, but we were 50th.
You were 50th?
50th, yeah.
So I'm hoping that, we can get something done with the new administration that will organize it, put it together. I mean, he has goals of trying to get everybody vaccinated. So, as soon as they call me or as soon as I know I can get it, I'll go get it. I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to be one of those people,
Oh, no, right. I'm kind of looking forward to it. We've been trying to get on the.
You have our permission. It's like all you, and it's during one of your presentations.
I'll say, sorry, people, I'll be back next week. See ya. Well, I said, if they call me and tell me to come at 3:00 in the morning, I'll go at 3:00 in the morning.
You just hope the doctor's awake to know that there's an arm and it's not an orange. Huh?
Well, obviously from what they reported this morning, they have the vaccines, but not the distribution network.
Right.
And it's and the people to inject, they don't have enough people for that too.
Right.
So
give them time.
That's what they're saying. They got to train people now. Surprisingly enough, no network was ever put in place. So Operation Warp Speed, I think,
wasn't so speedy.
Tim, I have to tell you, I tell you every week, but listen, I believe in compliments. We so are enjoying your class 101.
Thank you.
And I feel you're such a good person for many reasons to be giving it, that you could relate to what they're going through. And I'm just so pleasantly surprised to see several people, there. Have you heard from any of them? Have you gotten feedback?
A couple have emailed me like the next day, the next morning, or they'll send something that evening, just saying thank you. And, I really appreciate that I'm learning so much. And, one person sent me a photo shot of their outline with all their notes, and there was so much written on it. I don't know how they could read it, but it's your notes. As long as you can make sense of it, that's all that matters.
Well, Tim, it's interesting because I filled up 2 pages of notes yesterday on the second.
We feel we know a little.
And so it applies to people who have been, Jewish their entire lives. So much we don't know. So right. It's interesting to go through.
Yeah, every time I've taught it, this is the 3rd time now I'm teaching it, I've had some congregants who have said to me, I was raised Jewish, been Jewish all my life, but I never felt like I really learned a lot of these things. So this is a chance for me to get to know a little bit about my own background, my own faith, my own spirituality, whatever,
And then you brought up like chet, and all of a sudden I realized I hadn't heard that since I've been a little child, and I think I heard my grandmother use it one time. Mm-hmm. But it brought back things that were completely, out of my mind, and
right.
So we're finding it interesting too.
Good.
So
I'm glad. Oh. All right. Well, let's get started. I'll talk a little bit about this week's portion, then we can chat and talk about from there. Again, we're moving further into the Exodus story. This is Parashat Bo. And we kind of reached the culmination of it in this particular Torah portion. God has continued to harden the heart of Pharaoh, and well, where he'll say that he'll let the people go, and then of course he continues to change his mind and say, no, you're not going, I'm not letting you leave. But it's in this Torah portion where finally, as each of these plagues gets more and more severe, where when the final plague that brings death to the firstborn throughout the entire land of Egypt, and this is from the very top in his own household to the very lowest of the low among the Egyptians, because there were Egyptian servants serving those who were wealthy at the same time. No household, God said no household would be spared. And as I think I said last week, they were also going to do the firstborn among the cattle. So that was also going to be devastating to the Egyptians. So that was the firstborn in every household. Males and females, at least I was looking that up, and since it makes no distinction, it does not say males only, so we can only draw the conclusion that firstborn among females were also slaughtered. Of course, the Hebrews are instructed to paint on their doorposts with the lamb's blood, so that the death will pass over, hence the title or name of the holiday, Passover. They will not be touched by what is called by many people the angel of death. And of course, this is what we remember, what we are commanded. It is in this Torah portion that God commands us to remember. Remember is one of the most often used words in the Torah. It appears something like 65, 68 times in the Torah. And this is one of those times where God tells us, commands us that we must remember this. And this is where we have the first idea that we will have a holiday known as Passover. God says there's going to be a set time for it. There are going to be set rituals. And we all know that even among very secular Jews, most Jews want to find a Seder to attend, even if they don't consider themselves to be particularly religious. It's important that they celebrate Passover. It's important that they find a Seder somewhere to go to. Excuse me. So it's in this section of the Torah where Pharaoh comes to the realization and finally has to admit that the God of the Hebrews is greater than he is more powerful than he is, and is greater than the gods, any of the other gods of the Egyptians. He finally has to say this to Moses.
Tim,
Yes.
he realized it before Trump did.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure Trump ever realizes anything.
Sorry,
that's okay. But this understanding is finally what convinces him to let the Hebrews go. You know, he's fighting against a force, a power that is greater than him. And very interesting, I didn't realize this till I looked at the Torah more carefully, or this portion more carefully. When Pharaoh has his final conversation with Moses and finally says, okay, you're going to go, you know, you're going to go. He asks Moses to have the God of the Hebrews offer a blessing for him. So he understands the power of God, that even Pharaoh says, you know, have your God, your powerful God, give me a blessing as well. So that's kind of interesting. So according to the Torah, the Hebrews have been enslaved for 430 years. And they're finally going to put this horrible period behind them and venture toward a new land that has been promised to them by God. They, according to the Torah, they are taking their cattle and they are taking their herds with them. And the Torah also indicates that some of the lower class Egyptians among the servant class are going to tag along with the Hebrews as well, suggesting that they ultimately will convert themselves over to the God of the Hebrews. Now, how many went? This is always up for discussion. The Torah says 600,000. 600,000 are going to flee Egypt. Torah scholars believe that that's not true. Historians believe that that's not true. When they look at the words in the Torah and they look at how they have been translated, they actually think it's probably closer to maybe 6,000.
A little
So
different.
that's a huge
zeros.
Right. So that's a huge difference. You know, so they really believe that the number that we're going to flee out of Egypt would be close to 6,000 in spite of the way it looks in the Torah. But again, this is where translations can sometimes become a problem.
Tim, how
Yeah.
long from when the Pharaoh said you can leave did they leave?
It does not tell us that, what time lapse there was before his decree that, yes, I'm finally going to let you go. And then they actually, get themselves packed up and ready to go. The Torah, it makes it sound like it happens very, very rapidly. But like we saw last week, historians believe there was a year between each of the plagues, even though the Torah doesn't directly state that. So we don't know, was this something where they said, okay, let's go, get ready. We're not going to, dawdle here. We need to get on the road. It's like,
you don't want him changing his mind also. So
right. Well, and that's the other thing. He says we can go, and then he changes his mind. This time he seems to really mean it, but you never know. The Pharaoh is not someone we can trust greatly. So who knows whether it's the next day, a couple days, the next week. I would suggest that probably not a lot of time elapsed, partly for the reason that the Pharaoh is not the most trustworthy when he gives his word.
Well, didn't they say it was quick because the bread didn't have a time to rise? It was the unleavened bread, hence the matzah.
Right, that's where we get, yes, the celebration of matzah. Actually, there are many Torah scholars that believe that there were actually two holidays. There was the matzah holiday and the Passover holiday that ultimately merged together into one holiday, which is interesting.
Wow.
And I had never heard that before, but I came across that in a couple of different things this week. So finally, we're going to move toward freedom. One other thing that I did mention briefly last week, and it comes up again this week in the Torah portion, is before they leave, they go to the Egyptians, the regular people, not to the Pharaoh, not to the court, but they go to the people, and the people hand over trinkets and baubles of silver and gold to the Hebrews, which is kind of interesting. Why they would do that, why they would say, okay, here's some silver, here's some gold, take it with you. But the words of the Torah say specifically, and this is in chapter 12, verses 35 and 36, that they do get silver and gold and even some clothing from the Egyptians, because it says, and the exact words in the Torah say that the Egyptian people were favorably disposed toward the Israelites. Favorably disposed. So in spite of everything, they had a good reputation, so that the people were willing to give them these trinkets of silver and gold. The other thing, if you remember earlier in the Torah says that when slaves are set free by anybody, any culture, any tribe, any nation, they are to be given something to start their new lives with. So that may have been at play here too. We're letting slaves go. You don't send them on their way with nothing. You give them a little something so they have a way to get their lives going again. So that could be playing in here as well. So, we know that when they leave, they have these things packed with them. They're taking their cattle, they're taking their herds. Many of the Egyptians seem to want them to just get out because they're afraid of the power of the Hebrews' God after all of these plagues that they have suffered through, and to just go, get on your way, get out of here. They've suffered long, for over 400 years. And, we just have to consider that, they're going into the unknown. They don't know what to expect, other than God has promised them that he will be with them, and they are going to a land that God has said will be theirs. So they have to just trust that's what's going to happen. Now, there's I read one very interesting modern commentary from a rabbi who is, I forget which congregation he's in. He drew a parallel between the Hebrews leaving Egypt and the idea of reparations. We know that there is discussion in our country of reparations for slavery in the African American community. There have been reparations for victims of the Holocaust. Germany has paid vast sums of money to the state of Israel in reparation for the damage of the Holocaust, and to some individuals and Jewish organizations. So this rabbi says that the idea of reparations for wrongs done to a group of people goes back to the Torah. He says that some of this silver, some of this gold that may have been handed over to the Hebrews was the idea of, okay, you have lived in slavery, you lived in bondage, we have wronged you for over 400 years, so this is perhaps our way to kind of, make it up. I thought it was a very, very interesting proposition, a very interesting parallel to make. So we know that in history, there is a precedent set for making reparations, as I said, with the Holocaust. And yet we have never done this in the United States. There have been no reparations for African Americans who suffered under slavery, nor have there been reparations to the Native American community for what was done to them. I mean, they were also extraordinarily mistreated. I mean, we can say that that was an act of genocide as well. When you're giving, indigenous peoples diseased blankets so that they're going to come down with smallpox and die, when you're going to march them and march them and march them across the countryside till they get so weak and ill that they die. I mean, that's pretty much, to me, definitely. And yet we have never really done much in terms of kind of trying to make good on that or make right. In other words, and what we've done is we put them on reservations, which doesn't really seem to be quite fair. And I don't know, if you remember from the early 1960s, there was a folk singer, Buffy St. Marie.
Yes.
Who was a Native American. I believe she was a Cree. Her background was Cree, the tribe Cree Indian. And she sang songs that were all about the wrongs that were done to the Native peoples, in North America. And I remember I was young and as a kid seeing her, and I remember hearing the anger in her voice when she would sing these songs. And I didn't really understand it completely, but looking back more as an adult, I understand where her anger came from, the mistreatment of the people. So I thought it was just a very, very interesting parallel that this rabbi who was writing this commentary today, this is a modern commentary right now, could see a connection between this particular Torah portion and the idea of making reparations to people that were wronged. In a way to try to make up for what's been done, a way to try to give them some sense of their dignity back, and try to make sure that they now enjoy, civil rights that they should have had all the way along. So that's kind of where I ended up with, because when I saw that, I thought, wow, I would have never maybe thought about that connection.
That's why you go to all the sources and they help you. And you
right, exactly. And like I said, in class, I have found that I love the conservative Torah commentary. I mean, I have the Plout, which we use at Mikveh Israel or the Reform movement, but I don't know if you've ever looked at theirs, but I really love the conservative Torah commentary. It's a lot more, it has a lot more notes in it, a lot more kind of little interesting insights than I think the Plout gives us. So I find it's just kind of I never go a week without looking at the conservative commentary as well as the Reform commentary. But, and I told the rabbi that, I said, I look at all of it. I look at some things that are kind of Orthodox as well. I mean, it's all Jewish. Just because it's not necessarily Reform, it's still all Jewish,
Tim, I have one or two questions, if I may.
Right.
Tim, I roast Brussels sprouts, so come join us.
Actually, we're going to have some this evening with dinner. So there you go.
Okay, well, great minds think alike here.
I love Brussels sprouts.
I do too. And have you ever grilled them, broiled them?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You do too. Okay.
Yep, little balsamic.
Yes, we're in my kitchen here. Okay. Yep. That's why I was jumping up here. Two quick questions. One, Pharaoh's gods were statues, correct?
Right.
All right. So for him to go and accept or turn to have the Hebrews, have your God give me a blessing, whatever you wanted to call it, that's going far because he can't see the God. It is right. Accepting the oneness and saying, all right.
Right.
Share with me, maybe, I don't know if Jeff got it. I don't know. What happened over the 430 years from Joseph and the Hebrews being looked at, let's say, positively, to how it completely changed and they went into slavery in time? What happened?
Well, when they first arrived in Egypt, and Joseph, of course, was esteemed in the court of the Pharaoh, and then ultimately, he brings his brothers come, and for a while life is good in Egypt. It was because times were good, things were good. I mean, the society was functioning, it was fruitful. But remember, we learn in the Torah that bad times are coming, that there is going to be times when the food will not be so plentiful, the cattle will not be as plump and whatever. And so when bad times come to Egypt, now Joseph was smart, he put stuff aside, but also when times are not as good, people don't necessarily want to share as much with those who are not, their own people, their own kind, if you will. And so there is this turnabout where, well, what we have, we need to use for us. And we shouldn't be having these people living here and having to feed them and take care of them. And so that changes the fortune of the Hebrews in Egypt, because they went from times that were good, just like, think of it, I guess, like the pre-depression, and then all of a sudden times were bad post-depression, and that changes the status of the Hebrews in Egypt.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I suppose, whenever, I mean, look at the United States. I mean, how anti-immigrants, the United States at times was in the early part of the 20th century, because, we can't afford to be thinking about other people. We don't need other people. We put quotas, we only let X number of people in. And even during the Holocaust, when they knew that, Jews were escaping from, the dictatorship in Germany under Hitler, they still wouldn't even change the quotas. They still wouldn't say, well, because there's a horrible thing going on, we'll let more people in. They steadfastly held to the numbers. I'm sorry, those are the numbers. That's it. We can't do anything about it.
Well, of course, those numbers are, and even today, artificially created. They set the numbers, and then and there's a long story behind it. It also depends on the needs at the time.
Right.
Believe me, when they needed labor force out in California to build the railroad, they certainly brought in a lot of Chinese workers because they were very effective in building railroads.
Right.
And then not too many years later, you had the Chinese Exclusion Acts and the anti-immigration there.
Right.
But then they needed workers, so the Japanese came in. I mean, we have an incredibly long history of immigration policies.
Right. And I guess, it was kind of true back in the, days of the Torah as well. When the people, when things were good, they needed the people. Okay. When things are bad, okay, well, we're not going to be so good to you anymore. Your lot in life is going to change from, we're okay with you being here to, well, we're not so okay with you being here anymore.
Right. And that changed. That's throughout history,
Right.
Did God tell Moses in what direction to go? I mean, he didn't have a GPS. No, I'm looking. I get practical. He's leaving Egypt.
He said, go that way.
Which road do you take? I mean, he went into the desert, didn't he?
Right. I don't know that there's any specific command from God that says, head whatever direction, or, follow Route 42 till you get to the junction of Route 75. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking, that in some way, God must have given Moses some idea of, we know they get to the Reed Sea or the Red Sea at some point. So they're clearly heading out of Egypt. They're heading toward the east, because that would be east of Egypt. So somehow they must have had an idea that was the direction to go to, but why, how exactly, or how God makes that clear to them or to Moses specifically, I'm not entirely sure. I just know I'm glad we live in a day of GPS.
Yeah. And of course, he did burden us. It was the only land probably in the Middle East that doesn't have oil.
Yes. One of the great, things that we always hear is, okay, so we get this land, but we get the part that is not rich with oil reserves. Something just not quite right about that. There's all this oil in the Middle East, that can make a country very wealthy, but unfortunately, none of that happens to be where we are settling, where Israel happens to be. So,
Although they do now have great natural gas reserves. They have, of course, that's being fought now offshore. So
yeah.
that's the other thing.
Can you send him the link for One Night in the Garden?
It's on YouTube. I think you can pick that up.
All right, tell him.
One, nothing to do with this discussion. One Night in the Garden.
Larry had us.
Larry had us watch it the other day. It was about the Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden in
Oh,
1939.
Have you heard of it, Tim?
oh yes, I remember. Yeah, I mean, it was quite the big thing. I mean, when you tell people that there were Nazi rallies going on, you know, in New York
Right.
City, they're like,
Yeah.
you know, they're astounded by it. But it was a very big rally. I mean,
20,000 people in Madison Square Garden. It looked like a Nuremberg rally. And
exactly. Yeah.
If you get a chance, Jeff said on YouTube, it is unbelievable. They found this footage years later, and it's
they made a documentary out of it.
Right. Well, you know, there were people here who supported Hitler, you know. And,
absolutely. As there was in England.
Right. I mean, it wasn't that we were, you know, Foursquare, every single person looked over there and said, oh, you know, what a horrible guy. We got to do something about this. You know, there were supporters here. You know, we know Henry Ford was a supporter of the Nazi regime. You know, people don't like to remember that.
What is it, Jeff's number we saw is made up of more German heritage than I think any other.
The largest ethnic group in America was German. So,
right.
Which is interesting. I mean, of course.
And it's interesting. We had Eisenhower who's back.
But they fought, you know, when the war started, though, of course, everything changed. So
right. Well, you know, but then, you know, that we can look at what happened to the Japanese Americans, who many of them fought valiantly in the war effort, but of course they were interned in camps and all of that. And
another very bad moment in American history. Yes. It took many years. I think it took Congress 20 years to offer an apology, and then waive reparation money there, but they failed to fund it. So there was no funding for the reparations, and it took another 20 years to get funding for that. And most people had expired by the time the money came in.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I just watched, I don't know I think it was on earlier in 2020 on PBS. I watched an episode of Frontline where they were talking about what's going on in China, in Western China, with the Uyghur people.
Oh, yeah.
That are being put in these camps. And they were calling them, you know, re-education camps. They're basically sort of concentration camps, if you will, to try to make them Chinese, to give up their own culture, their own language. They're Muslim by religious faith.
Correct.
And to have them give up their religious background. They take the children away from the parents and completely educate them in Chinese ways. And there's these cameramen for Frontline, how they got some of the footage, I don't know. But there are so many cameras in this area of China. And these are major cities over there. I mean, the one city is over 1 million people, and they have cameras everywhere. I mean, they were just putting their camera up and showing the lines of cameras. And they have cameras on the ground that will actually, when someone walks past this, I guess maybe it's more than a camera, but they have the technology where when someone walks past this device, it can read everything that's on their phone immediately. So if they've been looking up on their phone sites that they're not supposed to, for example, like the Quran or Muslim prayers or things related to their own culture, it can know that just by them walking by, it scans it, and that puts them up for immediate arrest. It's scary. It was one of the most frightening things I've ever seen.
When you were talking about Native Americans, can I recommend for both of you a program Jeff and I have really gotten into? I don't know if you've heard of it. Longmire.
I don't know that one, no.
Write it down. It is a
Netflix. It's a cowboy,
a sophisticated,
modern day cowboy.
and the issues that he comes up with, and it's right by a Indian reservation, and
It takes place in Wyoming.
you'll like it because the issues that come up are very much issues today and dealing with people and races, and you'll see what I'm saying. It's not just a cowboy in India.
Right.
but
Yeah.
it's
Every week
excellent.
involves another murder, so be aware.
Well, that's okay. You know, murder is.
Especially when it starts, you go, he doesn't have a long part. He's gone already, you know. By the
Yeah.
way, quick aside, I mean, it's our chance to talk to you here. We saw One Night in Miami.
Oh, did you?
I thought the acting was excellent, especially Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay. I thought he personified him
Right.
the way he was.
It's a very fascinating film. I was very taken by the performances and the whole sort of backdrop that it was, you know, the early, you know, 60s civil rights, and, you know, that Malcolm X was trying to convince these people, you know, use the platform that you have, you know, like Sam Cooke, don't, you know, just make pretty music, use your platform for, you know, convincing people what's important here. And then when he finally sings the song "A Change Is Gonna Come," which I still think is an extremely powerful song of the civil rights era, I thought it was a really, really interesting movie,
Yeah, well, it's certainly getting a lot of viewing, so a lot of people have seen it.
Right.
I guess we still have time on our hands.
Yes. Well, we watched, now on a whole different note, we watched a movie last night. It's a couple years old, but I don't even know how I found it. If you want to watch a movie that's going to make you feel sort of claustrophobic, for lack of a better word, it's called The Assistant.
Assistance.
Yeah, The Assistant. It takes place all in one day. The whole movie from beginning to end is all one day in an office building. And
Okay.
it's hard to talk about it because you just kind of have to experience the movie to kind of get the idea of the claustrophobic nature of the movie. I mean, it was really interesting, well done. I was probably not a big hit because it's not the kind of movie that would be a big hit.
Right.
And there's no like major stars in it that are well known. Although the young lady who plays the leading role is very, very good. But I've never watched a movie that made me feel so sort of hemmed in and sort of closed in.
Don't need that now.
Yeah.
You know, we're going back and catching some of the classics. We saw yesterday, the day before, In the Heat of the Night.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I hadn't seen that in 50-something years. And to go back and watch that performance, those performances in the heat of the night,
I'm
it
sorry,
is so
that
good.
was a doctor. I
And
apologize.
And
Okay.
it was why it truly is a classic. But it was kind of interesting. I still enjoyed that 50-year-old movie.
Right. Oh, I love to go back and watch some of those, you know, especially when I haven't seen them in a long time,
Right.
to reevaluate them. And I mean, occasionally you see one that you liked and then you realize, I don't know why I like this. It's really not that great.
Well,
No,
I went back, saw In Heat of the Night again, and I said, wow, that really was good.
Do you know one of my favorites, Sing Again? Some Like It Hot.
Oh.
I think that is just one of the funniest their parts, right?
Yeah.
I just thought that.
And when we went back to see it again after so many years, you forget what happened sometimes, and and you know.
But see, that was classic comedy. That, you know, it's to me the same reason why an old episode of I Love Lucy can still be funny, because they were such geniuses at what they did. And so that classic comedy, even if you've seen it, I mean, there are some episodes I've seen.
The chocolates with
Right,
her, the chocolates.
But it's still funny. And actually, when I was still teaching, and we would do a lesson on humor, and I would say humor is difficult to write. Humor is, you know, it's probably one of the hardest things to write, because what's funny to one person is not so funny to someone else. But I would actually show my students a couple of episodes of I Love Lucy, to talk about humor. And I would have kids. So these are, young kids who are into all their hip, cool stuff and whatever. And they would tell me, they would say, that's funnier than anything that's on TV now.
Well, she was a genius at
Right.
From
comedy.
what I've heard, Tim, with humor, it's not so much the words, it's the timing.
Oh, sure. Oh, sure.
Like Jack Benny and some of them would have a pause, would wait a second, and just in that pause, it said so much.
Oh, exactly. Oh, yeah. Comedy, even a stand-up comedian. I mean, I'm sure the rabbi knows this. It's like, knowing the right amount of seconds before you deliver the next line,
Right.
can have more impact than if you just go right ahead into it.
Right.
And I mean, that's something that I guess these people who are comics geniuses that way know how to do that. I mean, I don't know how to do that.
He complimented me because I had told him something several months ago with the pandemic I had read, and he went, Floss, that's great. Can I use that in my gig? I said, you don't even have to pay me royalties. So let me share one other thing I told him just the other day. I was talking to him and he said, I like that. I'm going to use that in a sermon. We were unfortunately just at a funeral Sunday. Our neighbor passed.
Oh, sorry.
And thank you. Thank you. All right. And there was a man officiating who was not a rabbi. I don't know who he was, but he was officiating. And when it came time to put the dirt on the casket,
Right.
and he said, it's like putting a blanket. It's keeping warm and comforting. When I thought of the security blanket and,
Sure.
And I was very touched. I've unfortunately been to lots of funerals. I've never heard that term. And I said to the rabbi, have you? And he said, no. He said, but I like it. And he said, may I use it? Sure, it's not right, but I'm glad I keep them going here on.
I mean, it is, but it's a very comforting image. I mean, when you plant that image in the people who are there at the funeral, it's a comforting kind of image to leave people with. So it is a powerful, you think about a warm blanket, what that means to people. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful way.
Well, I don't even know the man who did it. I guess I could find out. But a question regarding that, Jeff and I discussed. The way they had it, they had the dirt, they had the shovel.
Right.
And when someone finished, they gave you the shovel. Jeff said that's not the way it should be.
No.
Am I right?
No.
That it should be put in the dirt.
Exactly.
And take it from there.
Right.
And,
You're not supposed to
I'm being handed it. Is that you're not passing on the bad luck, or what is?
It goes into the idea of, you're not supposed to be passing on the bad, the grief, the mourning, the sadness. So everybody gets to lift it out of the dirt themselves. You don't hand it off. You don't pass it off. When you finish, you put it back into the pile of dirt. The next person comes up, they take it out themselves, do what they're going to do, and then that's the order that it's supposed to be.
Right, that's the traditional way I remember from way back.
They didn't do it here, but they had so few people.
And I mentioned it to you, Floss, I never heard of that. I said, well, that's the way we used to do it.
No, but then I realized we had done it at other funerals. Tim, with the parashah, then it just ends with them being told to leave. Is this it?
Yes, we're not at the point where they're at the Red Sea yet. We haven't gotten there yet. It sort of ends at the point where they're going. They've made their bargains with the Egyptians for the silver, the gold, and it's time to take off. And that's kind of where we end, and then we'll pick up in the following portions.
Well, thank you, Tim.
So
enjoy your Brussels sprouts.
I will. We're doing salmon, Brussels sprouts. It's going to be a rather.
What time are you serving?
I mean,
what time?
I know. I don't know. I just had a taste. I said to Caleb, he was going out. He says, I'm going to go to the store and get some seafood. I said, I just really have a taste for salmon. We haven't had salmon for a while. We have Brussels sprouts. I said, that just sounds really good to me. So that's what.
Well, you're in our thoughts and hearts here, because yesterday I wanted fresh fish. And I went to the market and I knew I make it and put it over spinach, roll it in spinach.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to Jeff, I called him, I said, honey, let me give you some other, the fish did not look good. You know, when
yeah.
fish looks fresh, it's like calls you. When it looks
sure,
like it's
yeah.
been sitting there, and I couldn't do it. So
Well, see, we've got roostos here in Savannah, and they are very good. And I mean, they'll go back and cut you whatever size you want if it's not there, you know, all of that. And it's fresh. Well, so far we've never been disappointed with anything
Right.
we've purchased
Well,
there. Because I love
yeah.
seafood. I love fresh seafood.
Yeah.
I could,
Tim, a quickie for you.
Yeah.
I heard the other day, one of the things you should keep a close eye out on is Publix pharmacy down there. I heard the other day in Pula, they had the vaccine available and nobody else did down there. Of course, when people found out about it, they quickly ran out. But
Right.
Keep an eye on your pharmacies too.
Right.
Because you want to get it sooner rather than later.
Oh yeah, the minute I hear, yes, I understand that, because I know people start calling, and then, you know, before you know it, they're finished, they're done. They've used their complete store of what they have. So yeah. Oh yeah, I'm paying attention. I mean, even Caleb at Kroger, because they have a pharmacy at the Kroger he works at. I said, and if you hear that they're going to get the vaccine at the pharmacy there, I said, you're working there. I said, come home and give me a heads up right away.
You're right. Well, you know, the good news is as more people get their shots, they won't need them, and then there'll be less in line. So eventually, I think we'll all have them. So who won
I
them?
hope so. I hope that it would be nice. I mean, I know their goal is by the beginning of summer, which sounds like that's not that far away. But if they could get that done, that would be amazing.
Yeah, it would be nice to kind of quote unquote return back to normal.
It sure would. It sure would.
Okay, Tim, take care.
All right, you too. Shabbat
Have a
shalom.
good Shabbat.
Yeah, you too. See you
Right.
next week. Bye bye. Or I'll see you Tuesday.
Yes, I'll see you Tuesday.
All righty. Goodbye.
Bye.